Welcome to r/is credit by Haunted TTS. Subscribe and like this video for more, and don't forget to click that bell button for notifications. Nurses, doctors, hospital workers of Reddit, what's your creepiest experience in a hospital? I used to work as an STNA in a nursing home. Worked third shift throughout university. During the night we turned half the lights off so it was darker for the evening and didn't get a lot of light in the residents' rooms. We had one resident who was younger, 70s, and was mostly in for mental reasons. She had long, dark hair and was very thin. I was sitting at the nurse's station at the top of the hall and heard a call light go off. I stood up, looked down the dark hall, and on all fours, straight out of the ring, this resident was crawling up the hall toward me. The other STNA had forgotten to put the bed rail up and the resident was very good at climbing out of bed. Needless to say, I needed some new britches and my heart was racing a mile a minute. Patient comes up to the unit from the Ed nurse warns me this is a bad elder abuse case and the local PD is involved as well as adult protective services. She was found on a mattress covered in urine and stool. The poor woman was horribly demented and her arms and legs were contracted in the fetal position. Her eyes were bloodshot and she was covered in wounds and open sores. Even though she couldn't move, those bloodshot eyes would follow me while I was in her room. She kept trying to talk, but her mouth was swollen and full of sores. She ended up dying shortly after we changed her code status. Her eyes were open and looking through the doorway when I walked in after the monitor showed asystole. I will never forget her face and those eyes will stay with me forever. So creepy. I got the opportunity to shadow nurses and surgeons for 2 of my class periods in high school. I never really experienced being in the ICU before. What was creepy for me was seeing how many unconscious people were fighting for their lives. I followed a nurse to a major heart attack patient. This guy was put under an induced coma, but his eyes stayed open. The nurse had me help put gel over his eyes. It's been 3 years and I still have his dead gaze stuck in my head. I also had to help reposition the guy and it was like trying to move an extremely stiff mannequin. Seeing a human in a not-so-human state is extremely uncomfortable and creepy. A 9-year-old girl came in once. Her parents had been finding her dolls hanging around the house with belts or strings tied around their necks. She went into a rage and held a knife to her own throat. They brought her to the hospital and during her psych evaluation, she said she heard voices in her head telling her she was stupid and telling her to kill herself. She said she didn't want to, but she had to listen to the voices. I couldn't sleep for weeks. I worked for a rural hospital and we had a patient that came in with a heart attack. We worked on her fruitlessly for 30 to 40 minutes. The doctor declared her dead and invited the family in. Her body laid in front of the grieving family for almost another half hour. Her family members begged her to come back and say goodbye. She promptly obliged. She sat up, hugged one of them and said goodbye. The entire staff rushed in and ran a full code for the second time. She was pulseless and cold when we started the first time and worse when we ran the second. She never made it. But she was back to say goodbye. It was one of the most unsettling things I ever saw there. My mom used to work as a nurse in the cardiac ward of a major city hospital. She told me that if they couldn't seal an incision after open-heart surgery, they'd have to be vigilant and bandage the wound while cleaning it constantly. She told me she'd have to clean wounds while watching the heartbeat within their body. She told me that one time she had to watch a doctor dig into a dude's chest cavity to remove an obstruction, all while the dude was conscious. I'm always amazed how brute force medicine can be. I used to work in St. Bart's Hospital in London, which in parts is over 1,000 years old. One of the buildings had 2 floors with massively high ceilings and so the floors were taken out and rearranged to make into 5 floors. The nurses working night shift would often tell us of the ghost of a night nurse who wandered silently doing her rounds at night, but due to the new floors, only her head would be visible drifting down the ward. Context: lack of room in the hospital, some rooms sadly must have 2 patients. Frontal syndrome patient, due to metastasis of lung cancer, laugh while we announce the high probability of lung cancer to his hospital roommate. My mom works as a nurse in the ICU and she always says that the patients know when it is their time. They usually say nandito na sila, they are alri here in Filipino. They also usually ask for a glass of water and just flatline right before it was given to them. Most patients, days before they die, say that they can see a black figure in the corner of their room. Scary SHT. My mom usually experiences not less than 2 deaths a week, whether her patient or not. I can't imagine the stress she goes through and I admire her strength for that. I do hospital security. Creepy stuff would be when you find doors unlocked that you locked and such. You're touring through abandoned areas and hearing things can be creepy. Most things out of the ordinary aren't creepy to me, more sad, tragic or morbid. I saw 2 patients die from bleeding trough their carotids, a major blood vessel in the neck. Both had a recent tracheostomy, and an infection slowly ate the blood vessel lining until it burst open. I didn't see this one, but heard about it multiple times. A suicidal patient managed to commit suicide by carefully observing the staff schedules and did it right after the evening shift went home, so only the night staff was there. He used a TV power cord and put himself on his knees until he died. But that's not the worst. To make sure the staff would be delayed as much as possible, he spreaded SHT all over the room and especially around himself. All I can say is that in the end, he succeeded. Infused patients can be really creepy too. Saying things like please don't let them take me, or who's that behind you, well only you and the patient are in the room. You get used to it tough and even manage to comfort the patients after a while. Also, like a lot of you said, often patients feel their incoming death. I've stopped counting how many patients told me things like I most likely won't be there tomorrow, so thanks a lot for your care, I really appreciate it, or I'm going to die tonight, I know it, only to die later on. Often when they say it, nothing's out of the ordinary with them, but they just know. Not exactly creepy per se, but I freaked out big time. I work in an animal hospital. We had just euthanized an animal someone had dropped off, a black lab named Chloe. I got her all bagged up and moved her to the freezer to be picked up later. Went to see the next patient after I was done there. Grabbed the chart off the door and looked at her name and history. It was Chloe. Okay, weird coincidence. Looked at her breed, black lab. Cue me freaking out in my head thinking the wrong dog had been euthanized by some freak mistake. Went and reviewed the records to be sure a mistake hadn't been made. Luckily we hadn't, just 2 labs named Chloe in our clinic. One of the worst internal freakouts I've ever had. 4th year nursing student here. My story is more sad than creepy. I was sitting for a 28-year-old woman going through alcohol withdrawal, day 3, the worst day. Sitting is when you sit at the patient bedside because the patient is a danger to themselves others. She was in full restraints, hands feet bound to the bed, so she couldn't physically hurt me, but she kept calling me an ugly nayar and spitting all over the room. After a while, she started hallucinating. She thought she was in the car and I was sitting in the front seat, her 2 kids in the back. She talked about her kids for a while and then started screaming and telling me to take the wheel. This scene went on for about 10 minutes of her explaining in vivid detail the car crash that had happened and how she had killed her son. When the story was over, she kept crying and apologizing to me and asking me to pick up her son's dead body and give it to her. She was given IV sedatives, but when those wore off she had the same hallucination again. It replayed about 7 to 8 times over the duration of my 12-hour shift. It was extremely unsettling because after hearing the story a few times, I could tell that this was something that actually happened and that she was replaying the horrifying memory in her head over and over and over again in her delirious state. Poor woman must have suffered so much. I'm glad she finally checked into a rehab program to detox, but it's sad to think of the long journey she has in front of her, living with the fact that she killed her 7-year-old son. I work in dispatch in the basement of the hospital. I was working the night shift and I was alone. I had the door closed and there is a key code needed to unlock the door. I am the only one in my corridor of the basement at this time. I heard over the intercom that there was a code yellow, missing patient, from the mental health floor. I have no idea how he got out, but now he was roaming the hospital. About 10 minutes later, the door handle starts shaking and someone is trying to get in. I stayed completely silent until it stopped, then got up and looked through the peephole. There was a man just sitting against a wall wearing a hospital gown. I went back to my desk and called security and I spoke as quietly as I could so he wouldn't hear and run away. Security came and I heard them take him away. He was yelling all sorts of stuff that didn't make sense and was clearly resisting them. A guard came in afterwards and asked if I was okay and I told him I was fine thanks to the door lock. I worked in a nursing home as an RNA. While I worked there 7 residents called me into their rooms to tell me thank you and goodbye on different nights over the 3 years I was there. All of them died during the night after they told me. They all knew, I don't know how, but there is no other way to explain it. One would be a coincidence, maybe even 2 but 7. We have a room on my floor that is known by staff to jokingly be haunted. I have had numerous patients in that room see things come from the ceiling and materialize in the room with them. Sometimes our staff attributes these to the hallucinations, but I was taking with a guy who was totally with it and he saw the same SHT. To add further credit to this, a staff member's father was staying in that room and my coworker joked, "Dad, you got the haunted room," and not 10 minutes later the picture on the wall lifted off the backing wire and fell to the floor. My personal experience in there is that the pulse oxygen monitor and EKG start reading when no one is hooked up in room. The room always gives me goosebumps. Worked security through college at a local hospital. The only creepy thing I remember is when a dead man moaned. One of my duties was to help wheel patients who had expired down to the in-house morgue. Once we were wheeling an older man from the ER down, and halfway down the hallway, he let out this low moan. I started to panic thinking that he was coming back to life, but the RN explained to me, newbie, that sometimes the air in the lungs doesn't come out until sometime later or is delayed for a bit. I've got a few stories. While I was still a student nurse, I was working in a very old hospital. They were renovating one of the wards, so the staff were advised they can sleep on that ward in the completed rooms until it was opened up again. One night I was sleeping in one of the rooms with a fellow nurse when suddenly I hear a scream from the bathroom. I fly out of bed to find my co-nurse huddled in the corner farthest from the mirror. ISHTU not, in the reflection of the mirror, was a super faint, almost shadow-like, figure in the mirror that faded like instantly. I knew it wasn't one of our shadows because there was a light directly above the sink and mirror. Never slept in that ward ever again. While I was working night shift at a hospital one time, we had a patient that was living with dementia and had some serious expressions. We had her in a Broda chair at the nursing station and she was talking with my co-workers and I. We had called one of the residents to the ward so we could get a sleeping pill for this woman, and he was in the middle of writing the order when the woman looks at us and says, "I really don't like this man." So my co-worker asked, "Oh, why not?" She responded with, "I don't know, he just gives me the weird vibes. You know what I should do? I should die on him." She then lays back in the chair, closes her eyes and dies. We just threw she was sleeping, so we didn't check her until the resident was done writing the order and he went to check on her. Said she was dead and kinda laughed stating, "I guess she showed me." I work at a nursing home. I'm not actively involved in the direct care of the residents, but I still interact with them on a daily basis. There was one woman on my unit who had a son who visited her every day. She was on hospice, so he wanted to be around as much as possible for his mom. She passed away during one of the rare times he wasn't in the building. We called him to let him know, and he got in his car immediately to be there when the funeral home came. The aides had finished preparing her body to be taken out, and we were all just waiting on the son to get there to call the funeral home. Her room was empty. The moment he rounded the corner to the hallway her room was in, her call light went on. The nurse on duty and I looked at it, then at each other, as if confirming that we both saw it. As soon as he went into the room, it went off again. That's the strangest experience I've had so far. So I'm not a doctor, but my dad is, and I sometimes go with him to different hospitals that he works at. There's one in particular that stands out though. This hospital used to basically be a death camp for people that got tuberculosis. They'd send them there for fresh air to heal them, and they'd die because there wasn't any real cure. Very many people died this way in the hospital, and the building in general is old and creepy looking. When he sees patients, I hang out with the nurse's pa, and they often tell me ghost stories. Because of working there, a lot of the staff has gotten into things like Ouija boards, recorders, ghost tours, etc. too, so that's also cool, and I've heard some of their recordings and such. Here are some of the stories I've heard. Until last year, there was an old elevator that was known for sometimes stopping you on either the second or fourth floor before taking you where you actually wanted to go. This wouldn't be a big deal normally, but this hospital is strangely laid out. It's a 4-story building, but only the first and third floors are in operation. The fourth and second floors look like a typical abandoned hospital, complete with broken wheelchairs, outdated medical equipment, and no working lights. My dad has gotten stuck on the abandoned floors several times in the past, and people have claimed to have bad experiences there. Patients who would report seeing the same people in their rooms. One incident involved several patients complaining about a little boy and little girl coming to their rooms at nighttime. Several patients refusing to stay in their room again after the first night. People hearing screams and children's laughter. A horror movie was filmed at the hospital on the third floor, and the staff kept noticing noises that were messing up the filming coming from upstairs. They went downstairs and asked the staff to tell the nurses on the fourth floor to quiet down. No one has worked on the fourth floor in a very long time.